Funding for Idaho Reports is provided by the Friends of 4, 10, and 12, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by a grant from the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation.
I am like Mrs. Peterman. If my son had gone down, I would say, you did the crime, son, you do the time. And it could have been my baby, damn it.
They expect us to watch our kids where the hell were they when mine was killed.
Nearly 3 years after the beating death of 17-year-old Christopher Peterman in the Ada County Jail, voters are being asked to tax themselves to build facilities and programs officials hope will prevent such violence in the future. But the vote may be close. Good evening. Mark Johnson has the day off. I'm Jean McNeil. Ada County voters will go to the polls tomorrow to decide the fate of a bond issue to finance improvements at the county's juvenile detention center and a tax override levy to fund community-based alternatives to detention. The bond issue is for a maximum of $1.5 million. The override would cost $320,000 a year for 5 years, or about $6 a year for the owner of a $60,000 home. There is no organized opposition to either one, and only one group, the Idaho Real Estate Rental Association, has expressed disapproval, that on the grounds that rental property pays an inequitable share of property taxes. Still, officials are concerned that the ballot issues may not pass. Each requires a 2/3 vote, and turnout is expected to be very light. As producer Gary Richardson tells us, much of the concern about the treatment of juvenile offenders stems from a tragic murder almost 2.5 years ago.
The 1982 Memorial Day murder of 17-year-old Christopher Peterman in the Ada County Jail shocked this community. Peterman had failed to pay his traffic fines and was locked up with several jail-wise youth who beat him to death. Across Idaho, that tragedy focused attention on efforts to keep young people in trouble from behind bars and on how they are treated when they are locked up. Ada County voters are being asked to approve a $1.5 million bond issue to make improvements at this facility. They are also being asked to approve a $320,000 tax override levy for alternative programs that some say could keep kids out of this facility. Chuck Yeaton is program coordinator and community resource officer with the Ada County Probation Department. $1.5 million to add 3 beds to a 32-bed facility. How do you explain that?
The issue is not really the expansion. The issue is bringing the detention center up to ACA accreditation, which we're in violation of some safety codes, which will not at this point guarantee us the safety of our clients. We have a central ventilation system. If there was a fire, it would suck up the fumes from one unit, spin it around and redisperse it into the other units, which would cause some problems. We have a wooden roof, which is a code violation. 10 years ago when the facility was built, it didn't have the current codes that are now being required by the American Correctional Association. Probably the most important issue is we have a series of locks that have to be manually opened on each sleeping unit. In order to ensure the safety, we hope to install an electronic unit which will electronically open all the doors at once in case of emergency or a disaster.
Locks are not the only problem. The way the center is currently arranged makes it difficult to separate different types of offenders from each other.
This is what you're seeing right now is the main unit, or the boys' wing of the detention unit. And as you see, it's very difficult for us to move or house first-time offenders away from the more serious or violent or repeat offenders. And as a result, we have to now develop an area where we can house first-time offenders and have another unit where we can have repeat offenders. And we're looking at the recreational area here. As you see back here, we're going to make our extension out east, due east of the detention unit, and we hope to accomplish having a little more flexibility and maneuverability in where we'll house the first-time offenders from the more serious offenders.
That flexibility also includes alternative programs aimed at keeping young lawbreakers out of the detention center.
We hope to divert the majority of the children coming through the use of our diversion or alternative programs. I would like you to think of this in the terms of a package approach. not only are we creating alternative programs which we hope to keep the census of the population down, but we need to bring the detention facility up to standards to ensure the safety of the children that have to be detained.
There is, as I said earlier, virtually no organized opposition to tomorrow's ballot questions, and they have won the endorsement of the courts, county officials, the police department, county prosecutors, and a citizens committee. Still, the process of getting to tomorrow's vote has not been an easy one, and there have been some differences of opinion along the way. We'll take a look at the whole issue in more detail now. We'll begin with the perspective of the courts. Grant Yee is the district court administrator in Ada County. The court is responsible for running the detention center as well as for handling juvenile cases that come to court. I said, Mr. Yee, that a lot of this goes back to the Peterman murder. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would. After the Peterman situation there, the court appointed a citizens committee who was chaired by Paul Buser, and their study indicated that all the juveniles should be housed in the juvenile detention. In other words, they wanted to transfer the juveniles to the detention center from the jail, and that's how we got involved with this thing.
What has the court's role specifically been in coming to tomorrow's election?
Well, the courts, because we are responsible for the juvenile center, we're administratively responsible for the operation, and so if there's any responsibility transferred over to the juvenile center, of course we'd be responsible. And I think where we're at today is the basis of two citizens committees input. I think you have Chris Bray here, he can talk about his committee as far as the alternatives go, and you have Vern Emery here, he can talk about the study he had done by LZT. But I guess it's our facility, and so if we're going to take on responsibility, that's where we're involved.
Every statistic that I've seen indicates that juvenile arrests are in fact going down. In fact, I saw one that indicated that they had dropped more than a third, I believe it was, in the last decade. Why is it necessary to even add 3 new beds to a facility when presumably the number of detainees is going to go down?
Well, it's not the bed space that we're concerned with. It's the ability to separate the juveniles into 4 categories: sentenced and unsentenced, girls, and then the high security. Now, before the jail was closed, we used to put all of the high security over in the jail, and the serious offenders that were sentenced were over in the jail.
And now they can't be any
Now
longer.
they can't be, and it's not the beds at all. It's the flexibility to classify, and that's your biggest headache in any institution such as the juvenile center.
So you're not really looking at expecting to house more juveniles down the road?
That's correct. We're just doing it better than what we're doing now.
The tax override section proposes to spend more than $1.5 million over the next 5 years on a number of alternatives: counseling, shelter homes, home detention, supervision, job training, that sort of thing. Are the courts, in your opinion, prepared to take full advantage of these programs if they have them?
Absolutely. Matter of fact, we've advocated some of those programs that the Citizen Committee under Chris Bray has come up with, and we're 100% behind those. I think if you study the compromise, we have to have both. We have to have the alternatives as well as the renovation of the juvenile center. They work hand in hand.
Thank you. We'll come back in just a moment. If the courts are responsible for administering the county's juvenile system, the Board of County Commissioners has an equally important role, finding the money to make that system work. Vern Emery is a past chairman and current member of the County Commission. He has been active in the negotiations that led to tomorrow's election. Mr. Emery, I mentioned a moment ago that the commissioners originally thought about not having a bond election, about going to, in fact, actually did go to the courts and essentially ask them to order you to spend the money. Why did you take that approach at first?
Well, we were, of course, looking at a quick solution to finding the money. And we first looked at the possibility of borrowing the money, found out that we couldn't do that legally. Next, we went to the courts to find out if they would, in a way, order us to get the money, and they said there's no lawsuit here, they can't do it, and so the final answer was to have an election.
For the court to have ordered you, then you would have been able to borrow the money? Was that
if they had seen fit to do that, yes.
Why, I suppose this is a question you've been asked many times, but why can't these improvements and new programs be funded out of your regular budget?
Have you heard of the 1%?
Indeed I have, the tax
well,
limitation.
and that in reality is it. There just is not enough money available in county government to find this kind of money for this kind of capital expenditure. And in fact, this year we're using all of our revenue sharing in just the operation of the county government. and it just is not there.
To the best of my recollection, this is the first time Ada County's gone to the people for an override in something like 10 years. Is that right?
In 1975, I think it was, they went to the election for the law enforcement building, which passed overwhelmingly.
Your original plan did not, it was quite different than what we're talking about now. It was an expansion, as I recall, from 32 beds at the detention center to 47, and it really didn't speak to the alternatives. Why has that undergone this rather drastic change?
We've gone through a series of discussion. We worked very closely with Mr. Bray's committee. We commissioned a study from the LZT Corporation out of Peoria, Illinois, and they said that the most important program would be an alternative program. And the suggestion for the larger number of beds came out of the court system because they're looking at population and so on and saying, we need to have space for them. If we're going to build, let's build so that we can have enough for the year 2000. But as we sat down, we looked at this, we discussed this with many people, we came with this compromise, which I think is a good one.
Is it the proper balance, do you think, between incarceration and diversion programs?
I think it is, and as Grant has said, we have to have the flexibility of being able to incarcerate the tough kids and to separate the pre-adjudicated from the post-adjudicated, and we need that kind of flexibility in that building, which we are planning.
The original proposal was to cost about $1.5 million, and that was when we were talking about 15 beds. Why is the number still there when we're talking about different kinds of...
You know, whenever you estimate what the cost will be, it's always a question. And so we're saying that we're asking for the permission to go to $1.5 million. We hope that we won't have to go to that, but we need that kind of a umbrella in order to finance the total operation.
Finally, Mr. Emmer, you mentioned the talks you had. I referred to them as negotiations. I don't know if you'd agree with that word or not, but the talks you had with the Citizens Committee. What did you have to give, and what did you get from those?
Well, I don't think it's a matter of give and take. I think it was a matter of sitting down and looking at all of the alternatives and looking at what is best for the youth, in the problem youth of our community. And this is what we came up with as an answer.
Thank you. We'll come back in just a moment.
Surely.
As we have already noted, the current plan was in part the result of, as Commissioner Emery says, talks between county commissioners and a citizens committee set up by the courts last January to look into alternatives to detention. Boise attorney Chris Bray chaired that 13-member committee. His group opposed the commissioner's original plan to add 15 beds to the detention center. Why did you oppose that, Mr. Bray?
Gene, the data wasn't there to support it. But our first response was, in fact, to look at alternatives to incarceration. And there were some 8 people from the private sector, businessmen and women. There were 5 who were from the public sector, including representatives from the prosecutor's office and a magistrate who had been a former juvenile judge. We received significant testimony, particularly from law enforcement, who in Ada County, both at the Boise City Police Department level and the sheriff's level, have been at the forefront of finding alternatives for juveniles who face charges under the Youth Rehabilitation Act.
Some have said, at least privately, that essentially you dragged the commissioners kicking and screaming to these alternative plans. How would you characterize it?
I wouldn't characterize it in that fashion at all. We had the opportunity, as this Citizens Committee, to take advantage of and take the time to study carefully hard data with regard to juvenile problems. Now, having said that, there were certainly differences of opinion. And
essentially a bricks and mortar versus diversion programs difference, was there not?
Well, as to where the emphasis might be, there was a difference of opinion. But the compromisers worked out with some real give and take, found a balance. And the Citizens Committee is prepared to support that balance.
There were some fairly specific issues, as I understand it, in the last few weeks of negotiation in terms of how the levy money would be spent, for example, whether it would replace existing budgets, whether it would cover administrative legal fees. What was on the table in the last few weeks?
We looked hard to ensure that when a bond issue and an override issue went to the citizens of Ada County, that there would be accountability and there would be designated purpose. When those were placed into the bond and override resolutions, we felt that that accountability was present and that every member of this community could know that the money they were going to approve would be well spent for the designated purpose.
Finally, Mr. Bray, you indicated some months ago that your research told you that if these alternative programs were put in place, the county could look forward to perhaps cutting its detention level in half, from an average, I believe, it's 600 now to, I think you talked about 300. Does that still look like a realistic goal?
I think the goal of reducing detention based upon an aggressive use of alternatives is realistic in every community, whether it's in Ada County or in Bannock County or Kootenai County. Yes, we're convinced, but it takes, frankly, a community effort, not just those of the county commissioners or the courts, but it takes a commitment one-to-one of people in their community to make it happen.
Thank you. We'll come back in a moment. Let's get a final view now from another attorney not formally involved in the development of this proposal. Boise lawyer Bill Mauck represented juvenile Rick Yellen in his suit against the county after he was beaten in his cell at the Ada County Jail. Mr. Mauck, let me ask you essentially the same question I asked Mr. Yee right back in the beginning. How big a role did cases like Rick Yellen's and Chris Peterman's play in getting us to where we are now?
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt that had those incidents not occurred, that we wouldn't be where we are. It's unfortunate, but I think what happened to Chris Peterman opened a lot of eyes. The litigation that followed, the Peterman litigation and the Yellen litigation, which includes Rick Yellen but also a whole class of juveniles as well, caused people, I think, to re-examine where we had been going and what the alternatives are for the future. So it was a precipitating event, no doubt about it.
Are we looking at a combination, I guess, of genuine concern and compassion for these youths, together with, frankly, some perhaps well-founded fear of huge legal liability?
Well, I think there's a combination of the two. One of the things that I think is most encouraging to me is that out of this whole process, I have noticed a sincere commitment to rehabilitation in the juvenile area. And that's as a consequence of this reevaluation process. That's very good. That's very healthy for our community to do that. I think there was some skepticism along the way. There were some minds that had to be changed. I think there's still a large number of people in the judiciary and in law enforcement who have not embraced rehabilitation. But the way in which this facility is structured and the accountability that Chris was talking about, I think will assure that, I hope it will assure that in the distant future, not just the immediate future, but after all of us are gone and no longer directly involved in the process, rehabilitation will still be the foremost and priority consideration of juvenile detention.
How much credit do you give Mr. Bray's committee in terms of making that a priority?
I give Chris and his committee a great deal of credit. I think there are a lot of people, of course, who deserve credit. There were some skeptics, as I said, some people who were reluctant. Mr. Yee deserves a lot of credit. The people on the commission do. Warren Gilmore, Mr. Yee's predecessor, I think was one of the first people to conceptualize the idea, and he started the committees to a large extent. The chief judge in the district, Judge Newhouse. Everybody has played a role to some degree, and we should give them all credit. And Chris's committee comes at the head of the agenda.
Do you have any concerns that the money might be spent, the programs be put in place, and for one reason or another, whether it's not being prepared to use them or some lack of embracing the concept, they'll go unused or underused?
I still have that reservation. I don't have it at this point. I've been a source of irritation, I suppose, in this process. But at this point, I'm endorsing this particular measure, and I would encourage the citizens to support the particular effort. But I think the long term still concerns me, because before too long, all of the people who sit around this table will no longer be involved in the process, or there will be other people who will emerge and carry out prominent roles in the process. I think it's important that this community and the people who are now participants keep the focus upon our objective of rehabilitation, diversion, facilities that meet those needs. And if we keep that foremost in our minds, hopefully in perpetuity, this is going to be what juvenile detention is going to be focused on in this county.
Well, on that point, let me open it up and go back to Commissioner Emery for a moment. You are one who will not be involved in this process after the end of the year. What are you convinced that the incoming commissioners have the same commitment to this that you do?
We have sat down with them, and we have brought them more or less up to speed on the program. We have, I think, commitment from them that they are behind it. In fact, there was a guest editorial in the paper the other day from Mike Johnson showing full support to it. I think, yes, that there will be commitment on their part.
To all of you, any of the three of you who want to get into it, Mr. Mock indicated that there are what he referred to as a large number within the police, the courts, everywhere, who just don't embrace this rehabilitation concept yet. Do you agree with that, Mr. Bray?
I'd speak to that, Gene. The Sheriff's Office and the Police Department have specialized units that look at handling juveniles, that is, diverting them from the court system, as the best means of seeing that young kids don't mature into adult felons. When we talk about rehabilitation, I don't think anybody in law enforcement, the courts, nor anyone at this table is talking about coddling juveniles. Rehabilitation talks about a one-to-one direct kind of meeting with juveniles, making them accountable and responsible for their own actions. But what this concept means is that jailing a juvenile is not the alternative of first choice. You give a juvenile the chance to prove himself or herself by a work release, by restitution, by a variety of the types of alternative programs that can be supported with a minimal front-end cost, and I think they'll prove themselves. But if they don't, and some will not, then you do have jail. But that's the final resort, and even when that happens, the structure that's being established out at the juvenile center is meant to ensure the security of those juveniles when they're there from hardcore juveniles or those who might physically assault them.
Mr. Emery, will this essentially protect county taxpayers from liability?
Should I look at Bill Mock?
You probably should, yes.
Yes, I think so. I think that, and another thing that, again, a protection is that we're looking for accreditation from a national organization on this to say, yes, this is the kind of program that meet the standards nationally, and this is the kind of program that should go on. Yes, we will be protecting our taxpayers. And that's the whole bottom line. We're asking for $6 a year for the cost of this versus large litigation, and it's a bargain.
Mr. Yee, are you satisfied you'll be able to get accreditation with these improvements?
Well, we tried to get the facility accredited 2 years ago, and we don't meet the physical requirements. In other words, we don't have the right physical space to do it, and so I guess what I'm saying is, without the bond election, we can't be accredited, and so that's what's important about getting the bond election passed. Because with the facility the way it should be, it'd be quite easy for us to meet the standards that are required for accreditation.
No guarantee, but you're pretty sure you can.
Well, if we're going to build a facility, we're going to do it right. There's no doubt about that.
Does this, Mr. Mock, do you think have implications beyond Ada County?
I hope so. I hope so. I think everybody around this table hopes so. There's a major piece of litigation pending right now involving the Youth Services Center at St. Anthony. And certainly what happens in Ada County reflects upon that next level of incarceration. Ada County, as the citizens of this county may not know, is the only county that provides this type of facility for its juveniles. And it's a model, and I suspect that other counties will look at it. Unfortunately, probably as the process works, and I hate to be so skeptical, but unfortunately it's probably going to take some litigation in Bannock County or Bonneville County or Kootenai County to cause those counties to then re-examine their posture with respect to juveniles. But whether it comes through litigation or it comes through some sort of change in philosophy among the powers to be and their political bodies, they're going to have Ada County to look at. And I think if Ada County plays out the cards the way I think it's going to be a good role model, and we're going to see duplications of this effort throughout the state, which is to everyone's credit.
Quick comment on that, Mr. Bray?
Yes. First of all, you talk about large sums of money. we're talking about the price of a candy bar per month. That's what it's going to take.
50 cents a month, I guess.
And then to the role of a citizens committee. This community has the chance now to solve a problem and to be known for doing that rather than to leaving it unaddressed. Indifference we cannot afford. We can take the steps necessarily to change the juvenile system for the better.
Your committee was disbanded. It was not made permanent. Was that a disappointment to you?
Yes, though we have the assurances of the court system that a new committee will be appointed with an ongoing role.
We just have about 2 minutes left. I'd like to ask each of you, starting with you, Commissioner. Two-thirds vote is tough to get when you're asking people to tax themselves. How confident are you these will pass?
I guess I would say it's nip and tuck, and so I would suggest to all of the voters that they recognize that the election is tomorrow. The election is from 12 to 8, and it's at your polling place where you
The same
voted
ones where people voted
in
November 6th.
And we urge you to get out and vote, because it's 2/3. In other words, one good vote, it takes 2 good votes to counteract 1 negative vote.
Mr. Yee, what's your assessment? Any feeling for that?
Well, I feel a little bit better than I did a week ago. I guess last Thursday when they had the open house, they had 40 citizens go out and actually tour the facility. And I think to me, that's a good sign. If people are willing to go out and see what the problem is, I'm sure they're going to make the effort to vote. But I think Vern's quite correct, though. If we don't vote, it's going to be very difficult to get to 2/3.
You're predicting a light turnout too, Commissioner.
That's right. But maybe the weather will clear up and people will say, let's go vote.
Mr. Bray, is there any chance that one will pass and not the other?
No, legally, both must receive 2/3 or both will fail.
What's your assessment of where things stand at this point?
I'm optimistic. Again, we've got the chance as a community to speak out. Those who define themselves for property interests, and I respect the Rental Owners Association for their position, but it's a narrowness of mind as well as a narrowness of spirit. We can be tough with juveniles and treat them fairly and still protect our best interests.
I don't want to cut you off, but I do want to get a word on that from Mr. Mock, who has had some experience working with this kind of override before. What's your assessment?
What you're referring to, I'm sure, Gene, is I was involved in the Firefighters Initiative back in 1978, 79. I can't even recall the year now. And we had an overwhelming support. We had 14,000 people in Boise City who signed petitions. These were not even just the people who voted. But getting that 66.6% vote is very, very difficult. We came extremely short of it, well over a majority, but nowhere near the numbers we needed. And
predict the odds on this one in just 5 seconds?
I think it's going to be very difficult. I hope people recognize they've got to vote for both issues, because the detention facility is only part of it. Those diversionary programs are essential as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, we are out of time. I'd like to thank all of you, Bill Mock, Grant Yee, Vern Emery, and Chris Bray. Just a final word, those polls are open from noon to 8 tomorrow at your regular polling place you used in November. That's all for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow night. I'm Jean McNeil. Good night.
Thank you.
Funding for Idaho Reports is provided by the Friends of 4, 10, and 12, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by a grant from the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation.